Over at Marvel Comics, an often overlooked time in Peter Parker's life that led to really great stories with a sort of rotating cast of creators was none other than Spider Man's Brand New Day. While most fans at this point were a little bit frustrated by the fact that One More Day had such a strong editorial influence from Marvel and caused the sort of dissolution of Peter and Mary from each other, Brand New Day gave Peter Parker the ability to sort of reset the clock and allow for several writers to contribute different aspects to Peter's life. One such writer, who actually happens to be the writer of the main Amazing Spider Man series, none other than Zeb Wells, contributed a couple of fun issues, including the Amazing Spider Man issue number 555, which is actually going to be referenced in a sort of different context in today's issue of the Amazing Spider Man issue number 21. My name is Ariko Braddock, and today let's go ahead and dive deep into the Amazing Spider-Man 21. But before we get deeper into the video, I want to go ahead and encourage you to consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button if you enjoy our content. I want to introduce this issue by reading Marvel's text that they wrote. What happened to Peter and Mary Jane? It's time. This arc will answer all your questions, including what did Peter do and who caused all of this. This issue is written by Zeb Wells, featuring art from John Romita Jr., inks from Scott Hanna. We have colors from Marcio Menyz and letters from VC's Joe Caramagna. The cover is illustrated from John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and Marcio Menyz. Here's a look at the kind of climactic cover of the issue, teasing a little bit of melodrama over in the Amazing Spider-Man 21, as this is not only a story that sort of references Zeb Wells' previous Spider-Man works, but is also going to really kind of explain what readers have been waiting for such a long time, pertaining to this sort of incident that caused the sort of dissolution of Peter and Mary Jane's romance. And big thanks to Adventures in Poor Taste for posting this preview of the issue. Here's a little bit of a look at some of John Romita Jr.'s artwork in The Amazing Spider-Man 21. And I kind of have to kick this issue off with a little bit of criticism, because after we've gotten work over from artists like Ed McGuinness and Terry and Rachel Dodson on The Amazing Spider-Man, I do have to say that on some level, I think John Romita Jr.'s art feels like a bit of a step back. Romita Jr.'s anatomy is just so kind of harsh and imprecise. I wish, some of these lines were more like, curvy and fluid, and were able to capture a little bit more details on the characters themselves, as opposed to John Romita Jr.'s kind of more laid back style, which I don't think captures all of the sort of like details and nuances on the page. There are moments, particularly when characters look really big on panels like this one, where it kind of recalls some of my past enjoyment with John Romita Jr. on the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. But taken as a whole, I just can't shake the feeling that some of these kind of character conversations and details are being omitted because of the imprecise work that John Romita Jr. is contributing to this issue as a whole. I do think that Romita Jr. draws some kind of great and interesting fight scenes a little bit later on in the issue. I did think that some of these fight scenes got and felt so violent to the point where I almost sort of like didn't believe that Spider-Man would take this to be as violent as it was. And I almost think that the reason why I sensed like so much animosity on the page is due to the way that John Romita Jr. draws these big characters, with these kind of like ginormous eyes that I don't always think is really able to serve certain aspects of the story. And I have no doubt that this issue was going to have a lot of people talking. But as of right now, I don't really think that Zeb Wells has really kind of shown his hand in revealing what the massive kind of plot points that Benjamin Rabbin brings that sort of dissolves the relationship between these two characters and what happened in the initial Amazing Spider-Man issues. But it's still very interesting to see kind of some of the clues leading up to that story. One thing I will say about Zeb Wells' writing in this issue is I wish that maybe kind of past issues would have teased a little bit more about Dr. Rabbin returning to the title. And I wish there was just a little bit more context for this character because after diving into The Amazing Spider Man 21, I had to really kind of dig deep into some of those back issues of The Amazing Spider Man, which I don't think can always lead to the best story in the issue. And for the most part, I feel like Zeb Wells is just starting to turn his gears a little bit. Among all of the issues of The Amazing Spider Man, it does feel like this one isn't quite on the level of past stories. This is most likely because they are sort of kind of building up, anticipation towards the next arc and starting to seed all of these plot points. And the return of characters like Dr. Rabin was a sort of unprecedented way to go about this arc, which is mostly focused on what happened between Peter and Mary. I thought was a really interesting way to kind of shake up the issue, but not one that we quite have an answer for up front. And aside from that, one of the interesting aspects of this series was that brawl that happened later on in the issue. It was sort of interesting to watch Peter engage with that villain and have, such a big and massive battle with them. I really enjoyed how violent some of the writing got from Zeb Wells and feel like it was a great homage to when he was working with Chris Bachalo in terms of the sort of tone that Bachalo led into the series. I'm hoping that some of these kind of Mayan plot threads will be explored and reintroduced in the next issue of Amazing Spider-Man. And also going forward, I really want to understand how kind of Rabin is able to tie into kind of the dissolution of this relationship. At the end of the day here, I'm a little bit mixed over on this issue of The Amazing Spider-Man. While I think it sets up a whole bunch of interesting plot threads, I don't think it quite has the time to deliver on them. While I do think it's interesting to go back to one of Zeb Wells' previous stories, I wish it was more clear why he sort of returned to that story in the first place and what the direct stakes are for The Amazing Spider-Man. Due to the way that all of these issues have paid off in some kind of form or another, and sort of watching the meticulous planning throughout the issue kind of, tease future installments and also reference where things were referenced previously is fascinating. But I am waiting for Marvel to sort of tie this together and really show kind of readers what their hand is. Honestly, if the publisher can sort of pull this off and manage to kind of take all of these disparate ingredients and mix them into a cohesive whole, I would be really fascinated to see it. But as it stands right now, I think this is a perfectly fine issue of The Amazing Spider-Man that's teasing maybe some big implications that I'm looking forward to. So I want to know from you, what were some of your thoughts over on The Amazing Spider-Man number 21? Were you able to draw any stronger conclusions towards the series? And what's your opinion on the Dr. Rabin character? Well, I want to thank you guys so much for coming to check out the video, and we'll be back really soon with more excellent comic book content. Thanks so much, and we'll see you soon. Bye.